Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have a very unique video that I think is going to be a lot of fun to do, and it is if you like this Star Wars movie, read this Star Wars canon novel. I do a lot of recommendations for people, canon recommendations, legends recommendations. I recommend if you like Ahsoka, if you're excited for the show, what types of books to read to hype it up. If you're excited about Book of Boba Fett, things like that. But this time I decided, what if I went through the theatrical movies for Star Wars and talked about, if you like this movie, read this book. And it's not just because it's a book that ties into the movie necessarily, but it's a book that deals with either similar characters or similar themes or similar feelings as you're reading it. And so obviously some people will agree with my takes and some people will totally disagree. That is totally fine. Let me know in the comments section what your recommendations would be for canon, for which books you would recommend for each movie. Some of these were super easy and I figured it out in instance, and some of these were super hard and it took me a while to figure them out. I'll say the hardest ones to do were the original trilogy. The easiest ones to do were the prequels. And the sequel trilogy was kind of easy to figure out, but the original trilogy was tough. Was tough, but I think it's gonna be fun. So let's begin with the first one. I'm gonna go in chronological order for this. So if you are a big fan of the Phantom Menace, I recommend to you Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray. Yes, this is a adult canon novel featuring Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan as Master and Apprentice. It is a fun adventure. It's a standalone kind of romp. And if you enjoy classic Phantom Menace era stories, such as the like the old Jedi Apprentice series, and you just really wanted to see more of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, I think this is a recommendation for you. And it gives you a lot of context to Phantom Menace that makes Phantom Menace a lot better. So that's what I would recommend. Now, for the next movie is Attack of the Clones. And for that, I think this one was also very obvious. I'm going to recommend Brotherhood by Mike Chen. This is a book that takes place almost immediately after the events of Attack of the Clones. It very much feels like an Attack of the Clones, Clone Wars hybrid novel, but more on the side of Attack of the Clones. It's following Obi-Wan and Anakin as they both are on separate missions that kind of connect, and they're dealing with that business on Cato Neimoidia that they reference in the movies. But Obi-Wan is very true to the character. Anakin is true to the character. There's a new young Jedi Padawan character who is delightful to read about. And you get to read about the Neimoidians. And this storyline of the Neimoidians is really interesting. And so I really enjoyed this book. This was one of my highlights of last year for Star Wars. So that's my recommendation for Attack of the Clones. Getting into the only animated movie I'll talk about on the list, the Clone Wars movie. Some people will be like, why are you including this one? Well, because it released theatrically. So for the Clone Wars movie, if you enjoyed that movie, I'm going to recommend Dark Disciple. I mean, this is low-hanging fruit for me. But, Dark Disciple took the Clone Wars TV show scripts for one of the seasons that they weren't able to make and just adapts it into a novel. And Christy Golden is a fantastic adapter of material. She does a great job adapting material in this book. She adds some of her own, she takes away some, she really tells a nice lean and quick fun read of a story. And it feels very Clone Wars. There's lots of ties into the Clone Wars storytelling of the TV show and even some movie references in here. And if you like the characters that show up in the movie, particularly Asajj Ventress, you will be very pleased while reading this book. The next movie recommendation book is for Revenge of the Sith. If you're loving Revenge of the Sith, you're liking that dark side stuff, storytelling. You're liking that Empire versus rebellion type things. You're looking for stuff about the Force, but from the bad guy's perspective. And that's why I'm recommending Lords of the Sith. This was an excellent novel by Paul S. Kemp that is about it's a lot of it's from Vader's perspective, and the Emperor is a central character in the book, and then also some rebels from Ryloth are in there, and it's Vader and Palpatine go to Ryloth to stop something, and it ends up causing a huge rebellion, and they have to quench it while they're there, and it has the mayhem that the cover would lead you to believe is in the book, and it's lots of fun and very dark. Next, for the movie Solo, I had a couple of options here. I thought about one of the YA books, Most Wanted, because it's a tie-in book. It deals really well with the characters, and I thought of some adult books as well. I ended up going with the book Last Shot, which was a tie-in book to Solo, although they didn't use that in the marketing as much. It released about a month or so before the Solo movie came out. Sadly, the Solo movie did not do well in theaters, but it hasn't been well received among the fandom. I think that it gets humor really well. The book does, and it also gets the characters of Han and Lando. They are perfectly handled here. And this explores their time, 3 periods of time for them. Lando before the events of the movie, then Han after the events of the movie, and then both of them after the events of the original trilogy. And so it's a really interesting way to weave 3 eras of storytelling. And so I think if you enjoyed Solo, you'll probably enjoy this. Next, for Rogue One, I think this was probably the quickest one that I said. Yep, choosing this was Catalyst, a Rogue One story. This is the Rogue One tie-in book to read. I mean, there were other great Rogue One tie-in books, but this one is one of the best. I didn't mean to spit there. Whew. This is one of the best. This is a book that talks about Galen Erso and Orson Krennic as they're working on building the Death Star. It takes place right at the tail end of the Clone Wars, moving into right after Order 66 and right after the Clone Wars stuff. And, Tarkin's in this, a lot of Clone Wars characters are in this, but the biggest thing is this is a prequel to Rogue One. I read this book the day it came out, which was about a month before Rogue One came out, and then I watched Rogue One, and so much of Rogue One I appreciated because I had read the book. And a lot of people were like, I liked Rogue One, it was fine. And then I told them to read the book, and they're like, oh, I appreciate Rogue One so much more. So I think this is a very obvious answer. So we're now getting into the really hard discussions, because some of these I had to really think, because some of the canon books don't tie into the original trilogy in the same way, and then the ones that do I don't always enjoy, and I don't want to recommend to a bad book or things, so I had to think about this. So the first book I'm going to recommend is if you like A New Hope. You will probably enjoy the character of Tarkin, which is why I'm going to recommend the book Tarkin. This is not one of the best canon novels, but if you like an exploration of the Empire, you like an exploration of the character of Tarkin, Vader, of course, is in this book, and also you see the Emperor, you see what Coruscant's like, you're seeing, this is earlier in the timeline, it's one of the first canon novels written. If you enjoy the character of Tarkin, you'll enjoy this book. That was the hardest one to recommend, I'm sorry. Next, for Empire Strikes Back. This one was also really hard to think about. If you like The Empire Strikes Back, you like really smart written stories. You like stories where maybe things are a little bit more gray. You like things where things are darker, perhaps. And so that's why I went with the story of Thrawn. Thrawn is not particularly a dark story, but it's a much more complex story because he's a villain written from the perspective of a protagonist. And you're seeing lots of nuance in this story. You're seeing the Empire in a way you've never seen before. So, and I think this is one of, in terms of just like writing style, this is one of the best written Star Wars novels to date. It's so stylistically well done. It was so artistically done. Then this one was a little easier. I'm sorry. I know I'm going to get flack for my A New Hope and Empire recommendations. Those were the weakest, I understand. For Return of the Jedi, I think this one's a little bit more obvious, is The Princess and the Scoundrel. This book takes place immediately after Return of the Jedi. It's about the romance between Han and Leia. It's about them finally getting together and then going on their honeymoon, and then hijinks ensue, as you would totally expect it to happen. And so this book, it was a delightful read, a really fun read. It told exactly the type of story that you're expecting it to. Some really cool Easter eggs and connections to other Star Wars projects in this, but it feels like right after post Return of the Jedi. Like, it feels right as you're finishing Return of the Jedi, this book is the spiritual successor if you're wanting to get something immediately afterwards. Luke's not really in this book, sadly, but if you enjoyed Han and Leia's storyline, you'll enjoy this. Next, we're getting into the sequel trilogy, which is never, ever divisive and never causes consternation among fans. The sequel trilogy. For The Force Awakens, I thought, what's a book that will help you understand the setup for The Force Awakens and the sequel trilogy as a whole, if you enjoy The Force Awakens? And I'm going to say Bloodline. This was not part of the Journey to The Force Awakens books, but it still has in the years before The Force Awakens as part of the marketing. It takes place about 6 years before the events of Force Awakens, and it's focused on Leia as she is getting fed up with the Senate, which is basically doing nothing and is divided. And so she takes a group and she starts forming the resistance and starts realizing what the Empire is doing. And of course, during this time, people start learning that Vader was actually her father, and that causes some problems as well. And I thought that this was an excellently written political novel. It really sets the stage for Force Awakens, so that's why I recommended it. Next, I have for The Last Jedi. I had a couple of options here. The lowest of hanging fruits would have been just to do the Canto Bight novella collection, but I was sticking with novels for the rest, so I didn't want to include that. The other option I could have had for The Last Jedi was some of the tie-in books like Phasma or Leia, Princess of Alderaan. And while those would have been good picks as their tie-in books, I didn't feel that they got the spirit of The Last Jedi quite as much, and so that's why I'm going to recommend Resistance Reborn. This is a book that's actually a Rise of Skywalker tie-in novel, but it takes place in between The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. And this is the type of book that made me appreciate, even though I wasn't the biggest fan of The Last Jedi, it made me appreciate it more. You appreciate where the characters are going. You really feel like you're connecting things in the canon together. There's a lot of things that you wish would have happened in the movies to make them a little bit tighter, and this book does that. It tells some fun stories as well, and it sets up Rise of Skywalker well. The final suggestion is for the Rise of Skywalker, and that's going to be Shadow of the Sith. This is a book that is like a prequel to Rise of Skywalker. It's telling how Luke and Lando were chasing down Ochi. There's also a plot line regarding some other Sith hunters. There's also a plot line regarding Rey and her parents and the cloning stuff happening there. There's a ton to happen in this book. It's a beefy book for Star Wars. For a fantasy novel, this would be nothing. But for Star Wars, it's a beefy book. And there's a lot of great storytelling elements. It's a lot of fun. You get to see Luke's Jedi Academy, and it really makes Rise of Skywalker much better, in my opinion. So, and it also feels like it gets the spirit of Rise of Skywalker and not just a tie-in book. So those are my recommendations. If you like a certain Star Wars movie, you should read this certain Star Wars book. If you have an opinion on these, you agree with my placement, or you say, no, I would throw out this book, put in another book, I know I'm going to get in trouble for my Tarkin and Thrawn recommendations for New Hope and Empire, but that's all I had. So if you have any recommendation, let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.